Hey, Christian Gray here. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of The Gray Zone. Just had a good session at the gym, had a good day at work. About to take the dog out for a walk and do all of that, or just take the dog for a walk after I record here. Today's episode is a little bit inspired by some stuff with Bucky recently, a little bit inspired by... There's a theme that I'm just recognizing and calling out in a lot of my podcasts so far, but there's a theme of meditation and some of the sort of like principles that I've learned in meditation, at least around relaxing and letting go a little bit more, that I find interesting to think about and just learn for myself in a little bit more of like a real world example, and also like what the implications of that are. So the other day I was taking Bucky for a walk, and Bucky's my 10-month-old puppy. He chipped his shoulder back in August at like 4 months old. And essentially since then, up until 2 weeks ago, it's now January, he was limping every time he played and ran too much. So that's the kind of context for this background. Now he's got shoulder surgery, and it's getting a lot better. He's healing, and he can't play yet because he's recovering, but he'll be good soon. Regardless, so Bucky and I were at a little park down the street, taking him for a walk, and his desire over these last few weeks and months, as his shoulder becomes more of a problem, it becomes a little bit harder for me to sort of maintain engagement and excitement for him with fun and exciting things like chasing a ball, because I can't let him run too much. So I take him to this little park down the street. It's almost always quiet. It was this day. And for the first time, Bucky's really good at listening. For the first time, he decides to leave the park, ignore me, and run down the street to at first I thought he was going to a dead rat that we'd passed earlier on the street that was squished by a car, but instead he went to a recycling bin and ate somebody's leftovers, which is honestly better from what I can tell. Either way, he's like running away, and in all honesty, like it was and it has been and it still is, but it's better now. But it's been like an emotional process watching him get injured when he's having fun, having to hold him back, feeling like I'm the one responsible for holding him back, seeing him become less engaged with me, and just like, am I being a bad dad because I'm injuring him when he plays too much? Am I not going to be like a good, like, is he not going to listen very well to me anymore? And it kind of spirals in this way. And it was like, again, this has been building over months and months, because it was since August and this was in like December. So it was quite frustrating. But at the same time, there was something else that I remembered, which is that and this is kind of like the lesson or the theme of today's episode, which is that the symptoms of a bad outcome are not the same as having arrived at the outcome. And the same thing goes, like, a sign is not the same as being at the end destination. Like, if you're looking at a sign that's saying you're 100 meters away from a cliff, and you start reacting as though you're already falling off the edge of a cliff, some people would say you're overreacting, but obviously that sounds like a way less pleasant experience and totally unnecessary than to acknowledge that you're still 100 meters away from the cliff, even if you're scared of heights like that. You kind of see what I'm saying. And for some reason, I feel like humans in general, we tend to have something happen to us and very quickly can jump to sort of the worst case outcomes and the worst case solutions, which in and of itself is totally fine. And that's not necessarily something to like try and avoid at all. But it's more about what happens after that. And what happens after that, I found for myself typically, is that I then stay in those emotions. I'm like, oh my God, like this thing could happen. What if this happens? This could happen, and this could happen. Bucky's hurt, and then I get let go from my job, and then my car breaks down, and now I'm financially screwed. Like, and he doesn't listen to me. Like, it's so easy. None of those things happened, but it's so easy to fall down this negative spiral. And essentially start to live, at least in that moment, in this future potential reality. And then you start responding and reacting to that reality as though it was happening now or it could happen. Which again, isn't necessarily bad, but When I think about, I took a couple economics classes, and I really liked the idea of the law of diminishing returns, right? Everything has a point where, yeah, it's adding value. Then eventually, like, an additional, more time spent in that space starts to detract from your quality of life. And so, like I said, with Bucky, I was feeling frustrated, upset, and then I remembered, like, the symptoms of, I made this up afterwards, but the sentiment of this came up for me, which was like that symptoms of a bad outcome aren't the same as the outcome. Like, Bucky's not listening right now. He's running down the street, but that's not the same as him being a bad dog. He's actually quite a good dog. And the odds of, because of the shoulder injury, him spiraling into being a horrible listener, like, it's low. Sure, it's possible, but it's very low. And so it's easy to say this. It's easy to say, yeah, like, let's call it there. Remember, next time you have something bad happen to you, that you're imagining the worst case outcome, and you're probably quite a few steps away from the edge of that cliff, and therefore relax, chill, take a chill pill, right? But I think there's a little bit more to it, and it's not always so easy to do that in reality. And that's why it's important to spend a little bit more time thinking about these, like, simple and obvious things. Like, just because you're not at the, like, a sign that says you're close to a cliff is not the same as the cliff. Like, it's easy to think about once, but I think spending a little bit more time, which is the point of this podcast, with these types of ideas, like, it lets you take more away from them and apply them in a more meaningful way. So why is it important to remember that the symptoms aren't the same as the outcome? And then, is that something to be avoided? Do we want to avoid seeing or thinking about the worst case outcomes? And to answer the second question first, no, I don't think so. Like, the initial reaction, feeling the initial emotion is super useful. It's helpful to be aware of what could go wrong and just have that as a point of reference, so you can be aware of it in case that same thing happens again. Or just, it's good and healthy to be aware of what the worst case outcomes could be. And that's something that's talked about in Stoicism a lot. They kind of talk about acknowledging the possibilities, but not spending too much time in any one of those areas. So no, it's not something to be avoided, but like we've also acknowledged, like, sitting in that space and these negative emotions for too long can be really detrimental. You start to, like, carry that energy with you. It holds you back. You become more risk averse. You live in a more state of fear, quite literally. Like, if you're always imagining the worst case outcomes, there's more stress that you're carrying because you're seeing and responding to these potential realities all the time, and potentially these one-sided realities because you're not acknowledging what else could possibly happen. And as humans, we are also we have a negativity bias, right? So we're acknowledging, and we tend to see the negative opportunities more so than the positive ones. And so, why is it important to remember that the symptoms aren't the same as the end outcome? Well, it's important because when we're able to let go of spending so much time in negative emotions, we can open ourselves up to a wider set of emotions, right? And experiences as we think about and spend a little bit of time considering the different realities. Like, that actually impacts you when you start to see it. It impacts how you feel. And you don't respond to the world as though the worst case outcome were always going to happen. Like, if you were playing in a hockey game and it's the first period and the other team has a breakaway and they're about to score a goal, if it's the first period, if you're up 3-0, right, maybe you don't take the penalty, or I don't know. If you're down, or if it's a tie game and it's overtime, like, you definitely take the penalty and risk the penalty shot. Again, I don't know if that was the best example, to be honest, but what I'm really trying to highlight here is that when we live in a place where the worst outcome is probably going to happen all the time, we're going to respond to the world differently and react differently than if we're on a more even footing and understanding the different possibilities of what could happen. It allows us to make more judgments from a place of more even keel sort of place. But so to do this, it's helpful to build a skill of letting go of these negative emotions when they no longer serve us, so that we can be in a better state and make better decisions with better outcomes and ultimately live a better life. So how do you build the skill of letting go of these unhelpful emotions and thoughts, ones that are holding us back instead of moving us forward? I think the first step is, and this is the point of meditation, right? The first step is conscious attention. So being aware of what you're currently focusing on what is holding your attention. Once you're aware of what you're putting energy into in that moment, then you can remind yourself that you do have the power to change what you're focusing on. It's helpful and it's a lot easier to let go of something by relaxing, right? If I'm holding on to something, if I'm just squeezing harder, because I'm becoming more and more like focused and intense, like I'm holding on harder. But if I relax, it's a lot easier to put something down, to let go. If we're not able to relax, if we live in this place of reactivity, right? You're constantly reacting. You're at the mercy of the world around you, kind of like a puppet. Like something happens, there's an emotional trigger, you see the worst case outcome, you live in that space because you're not able to let go of those emotions until something else happens that kind of puts you on a different train of thought and you think about something else in this like constantly stressed state of mind. And I do feel like in business, especially just working from home, like you're sitting down all the time, you're not moving, there's not much engagement. It's easy to see worst case outcomes and to respond to even Slack messages with like stress and anxiety. Like, it's not necessary. It's really not necessary. I don't think it's necessary to feel that type of stress and still be effective. But that's kind of the interesting thing here, I think, is the ego plays a role, and it says, hey, it's important for me that you spend time with these negative emotions. And that I think what the ego tells us is that if you let go of these negative emotions and of imagining the worst case outcomes, you're going to become lazy, you're not going to get anything done, and you're just going to be ineffective and you're not going to do anything. And I think there is a bit of a risk that if we do let go of the potential worst case outcomes and spend less time in these negative places, there's a little bit of a risk for sure that maybe your drive goes down. Maybe we do a little bit less. Anyways, but it's equally possible, and I think it's actually more likely that we would start to be more successful because we're less stressed, so when you're stressed, that's not just like a mental thing, it's a physical thing too. You're living more in the fight, flight, or freeze response mode. And when we're in that state of mind, survival is a priority, and we tend to have blinders on. Literally, our vision becomes more narrow. We can think less creatively, and we're more reactive to the first opportunity that feels like safety. What's the first? Like if you're on a sales call and you start to feel like you're losing a deal, you just start offering things like, oh, but like we can do this, and we can do. Instead of slowing down and kind of disengaging a little bit, relaxing, starting to become a little bit more curious, instead of just like overwhelming the person with things that you can do for them, kind of sitting back, letting them reveal themselves to you. And then you can be really precise with the one specific thing that could be beneficial to them versus just 10 things that are kind of random. And at the same time, so when we are able to relax and let go of these negative emotions, spend more time in a more relaxed state of mind, more calm state of mind, then I think that's where we can start to be more creative and be more relaxed, like I just said. So it's essentially, we're inviting a shift in perspective. We're saying, I'm not falling off the edge of a cliff. I can take my time to look around me at what might be beneficial to me, think about the other perspectives and the other possibilities, and then incorporate those into my decision making. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to put this episode into 2 episodes. But yeah, I think it's important to remember that symptoms are not the same as the bad outcome. And if you start to feel like you're falling into a negative state of mind and you're not able to let go of those negative emotions, that relaxing, taking the time to breathe, to stay calm, and then from that space, as you calm down the body, the mind will respond. It's hard if you're thinking about something a lot and about the negative sort of worst case outcome. It's hard to think your way out of that necessarily, or to like, it's hard to say, don't think about that, right? You're still thinking about it. But the body and the mind are very connected, and so if you're able to relax the body, then the mind will naturally sort of follow. And that's why actually taking some deep breaths, relaxing the body can be super helpful to allow the mind relax. And then to take the time to consider different perspectives in an earnest way. Not just to say, oh, that could happen and then move on. Like, take your time to sit with those perspectives. And who knows, maybe it'll make your life a little bit better, maybe not. But let me know what you thought either way. Appreciate your time. And yeah, if you're interested in coaching, let me know. Peace.